So I don't know if you'd noticed, but we are in the latter stages of a knockout tournament. And that brings on, when we're talking about football, the prospect of penalties. So I thought, let's do a video about trading penalties. Please like and comment on the video below. That will allow me to produce better quality videos and more of them in the future. If you're interested in learning to trade successfully on sports, then why not visit the BetAngel Academy, where we have more detailed videos. So, yes, I have researched penalties. I've researched many things, looking for just any sort of edge that I can get, and penalties is one of those things, trying to understand them, what creates them, and how penalties are scored. And it sort of goes back to a few years ago when a friend of mine was a director of a football club, and he said, give me some knowledge on penalties. So I went off, researched it for a few weeks, gathered tons and tons and tons of data, analysed all of it, and you know, what you're about to hear is some of the results of that analysis, plus a few graphs and other stuff related to it. So where you need to start when you're looking at penalties, because what I want to do is, I want to do this video, yes, we're in a knockout tournament at the moment, but let's talk about the impact on domestic football as well, because then this video will have resonance right throughout the entire year. So the first question you have to sort of ask is basically, you know, where do you tend to find penalties? And I can shortcut loads of research for you and basically say that that's in high scoring matches with teams with poor disciplinary records. So that sort of makes sense, because typically, you know, when there are more attacking, dangerous attacking moves within the match, and all of the sort of stuff that's going on around the pitch, and there's a propensity to score more goals, there's probably going to be more chances and therefore more fouls and therefore bigger chance of penalty. So yeah, if you're looking for a penalty to occur, you tend to look in higher scoring matches with poor disciplinary records, and if you don't want a penalty to occur, look at those low scoring matches with teams that tend to behave themselves. I think that sort of makes sense, really, doesn't it? Certainly on the disciplinary side, but even if you isolate the disciplinary side, when you start looking at high and low scoring matches, you see a correlation there as well. So yeah, higher scoring matches produce more penalties. But how many penalties are scored? How many, if you step up to that, that ball and you stick your foot through it, how often do you think that that results in a goal? I'll give you a guess. We're going up to take a penalty. How many times when the person strikes the ball does it hit the back of the net and a goal is awarded? What percentage is that? Is it 20%? Is it 70? Is it 50? What do you think it is? What's the percentage chance of somebody scoring from a penalty? Well, the actual number is 84.62%, just a shade under 85%. So what happens to the remaining 15%? Well, if you look at about 6% penalties, they tend to be missed, and the remainder tend to be saved. So it's interesting, actually, if you look over a period of time. I've analysed this as well. If you take all of the Premier League data, which is where those stats came from, and you analyse it over a period of time, you notice that the chance of a goalkeeper saving a penalty is actually gradually creeping up. So there are websites out there and statistics available that talk about how a player tends to take a penalty and the way that goalkeepers tend to try and save them. So you can see some knowledge creeping into it. At the beginning of the Premier League, back in 92-93, the chance of saving a penalty was much lower than it is now. So you can see stats is influencing the chance of saving a penalty. And that will be the same at a knockout competition as well. Everybody will have notes on everybody else, and they'll all be thinking about ways to maximise the chance of saving a penalty. However, it's still very hard, because if you look at the way to take the perfect penalty, I analysed loads and loads of data and looking at where the ball was shot and how that resulted, whether that resulted in a goal or not. And I think most of the academic data out there and all of the stuff that's available out on the internet pretty much confirms it. You tend to find that, in fact, if you hit the ball high in either corner, then it's very, very, very hard to save. But of course, it's hard to place the ball that well as well. But basically in the top corner and in the bottom corners is the best place to take a penalty. Pick a spot, hit as hard as you can, and you'll most likely score. Now, if you look at, I'm going to bring up an image on the screen here. This is an image of basically every penalty that I've got within the database, and it's a heat map of whether the goal was scored or not. So the blue area represents where a penalty was scored, and the red area indicates where it was saved. So you can actually see quite clearly there where is the best place to place a penalty. But there are some oddities within all of this data that I discovered as well, and one of them was that goalkeepers A, tend to dive more frequently than they should do, and B, they tend to dive to the right. So think about it from a psychological perspective. If you're a goalie and you stand there like a lemon, and then somebody blasts the ball straight past you, then necessarily, that's going to reflect bad on you. What was he doing? He did nothing. He just stood there. So goalkeepers tend to dive. So in fact, it's not a disaster, and you can see that on the image. You can actually see it behind me here. There's a little dip in the middle, which indicates that if you actually hit the ball in the centre, that's not a disaster either, because goalkeepers have a propensity to dive. Very few goalkeepers tend to stay exactly where they are. They tend to try and make a move. So if you look at what Harry Kane did, he had 2 shots to the right, blasted them in the back, and then the third penalty he just sent straight down the middle, which was actually incredibly intelligent and incredibly clever. But yeah, if you want to score a penalty, pick your spot, and you need to send it high and to the left or the right is the perfect place, but generally into either corner isn't too bad, but the goalie does have a chance of saving it if he dives in the right direction. If you replot this graph and you look at it from the perspective of the goalkeeper diving the right way, they've obviously got a chance. So really, your perfect penalty would be top right-hand corner from the striker's perspective and top left-hand corner from the goalkeeper's perspective. But that's how you would score a penalty. There is actually loads of data online. If you start searching for it and looking at it, you will find loads of data on there. Some of it is very simplistic, but a lot of it is a lot more in-depth. And there is some really, really good quality stuff that you see out there nowadays. So yeah, when we look at penalties within a knockout tournament, then what you will find is that obviously we end up in a shootout, and a shootout is very different from a conventional penalty. The scoring rate at a shootout tends to be a little bit lower, and this is because of the amount of psychological pressure. As we go through the tournament and we get further and further in the tournament, the reward for scoring and the punishment for missing goes through the roof. So if you actually look at the stats, the team that is going to shoot first tends to have a better record at penalty shootouts than the team that goes second. Why? Well, because if you put that first penalty away, then there's a lot of pressure on the second player to score, to keep them in it. So actually the current system of just going A, B, A, B, A, B in terms of teams taking the penalties is flawed, because it favours the team that gets to take the first penalty. There is discussion underway of switching to the ABBA approach, which is basically going A, B, B, A. So Team A go first, then Team B, then Team B, then Team A. So as a consequence, that evens things out. But as it stands, the team that tends to take the penalty first has an advantage. So there's a bit of debate about what advantage they have, whether it's nearer 50% or whether it's nearer 60%. But if you save 50-ish, 55%-ish or whatever, there is a slight chance that if the team is taking the penalty first, are the ones that are likely to win that particular shootout. So from a trading perspective, look at it from this perspective. First team goes up, takes the penalty, scores. Second team goes up, takes the penalty, a little bit more pressure on them, scores. So at that point, if you lay that second team, then one of the advantages that you will have is that when the other team comes up to take it, they've got slightly less pressure on them, but if they score, then there's a lot more pressure, and it builds and builds and builds and builds as the penalty shootout goes on. It's interesting, because if you look at penalty shootout graphs, you tend to see this pattern of the market going up and down. So I actually quite like trading penalty shootouts. Sometimes during the Europa League or the Champions League or some other knockout competition, I may not get involved in the match until late on, and then if it goes to a penalty shootout, it's great fun. You can trade those pretty well. But if you look at the penalty shootout, the longer that it goes, if the player is taking a penalty to win, their strike rate is actually remarkably high. But if the player is taking a penalty to stay in the competition, it's remarkably low. So again, there's a trading opportunity for you there in terms of the way that you are likely to trade it. The average in a penalty shootout tends to drop off a bit. Some of the stats that I've been looking at say it's around 68%. That seems a little bit too low for me, considering a standard penalty is 85%. But it could be correct. I'd have to go off and have a look at that. The problem with tournament data is there isn't as much data as you've got as in the domestic league, so it's a little bit harder to accurately assess it from there. But if you want some data on it, if you visit 538, a chap called Nate Silver owns 538's analytics and statistics based approach. He's actually got some probability trees of penalty shootouts. You may want to have a look at those. A little bit complicated, but they're quite interesting to look at. But also check out at Penalty Kickstat on Twitter, because he is devoted to doing penalty kickstats, got loads of data, much more than I have now, and I very often reference that if I'm looking at penalty shootouts. I found that to be an absolutely invaluable resource. Anyhow, there's lots of data within there, and I've sort of covered off key elements of it. There is actually a lot more depth I could go into, but hopefully that's given you a bit of an indication as to what to expect when you see a penalty or a penalty shootout.